I'm Annie with ByAnnie.com, and today I'd like to share with you some tips and tricks for foundation paper piecing. Foundation piecing is an old made new technique, which basically uses a foundation of paper or fabric to aid in sewing. There are lots of different techniques for foundation piecing, from English paper piecing to flip and sew piecing. The method I'm going to show you today is known as underpressed piecing, and it's one variation on the theme. If you've never made a block using foundation piecing, you are going to love this technique. It's the very best way to get really accurate blocks, and it makes really easy work of complicated blocks. For instance, can you imagine trying to cut all the templates for one of these blocks and then figure out how to get them to fit together just right? With foundation paper piecing, we'll start with a paper pattern and use it as a guide for placing and stitching all of our pieces in place. We'll position the fabric pieces in place on the underside of the paper. Then the foundation is turned over and the sewing is done on the foundation with the fabric underneath. This allows us to see and sew directly on a mark line, which results in incredible accuracy with no guesswork. This is a skill that every quilter should have in his or her bag of tricks, so let's get started. We're going to start by gathering a few tools. You'll need a rotary cutter, a mat, and a quilter's ruler for cutting out your fabrics and trimming pieces as we go. I'd also recommend a pair of paper cutting scissors for cutting apart the pattern and some thread snips for snipping threads as you go. You'll also need 2 more specialty rulers to make this process really easy. First, get a thin plastic ruler to use for folding the pattern. I like using a ruler that has gridded lines every 1/4 inch so that I can fold some 1/4 inch guidelines, but if you don't have one of those, you can also get by with a firm piece of thin cardboard. A postcard or even one of ByAnnie's zipper color cards works just great. Secondly, you're going to want and add a 1/4 ruler. This handy little ruler has a lip that butts up against the foundation pattern and makes it really easy to trim your fabric pieces, adding an accurate 1/4 inch seam. You will love this ruler, so make sure to get one. Finally, a washable school glue stick is really helpful for positioning the first piece of fabric in place. And of course, you'll need a sewing machine with a foot that enables good visibility. I like using my 1/4 inch foot or a number 37 foot on my Bernina, as well as an iron and an ironing mat. And a stiletto and pressing tool will be really helpful. Finally, you'll need a foundation paper piecing pattern, and this can be something that you design yourself or something from a purchased pattern. Today we're going to work with my pattern Air Show 2, and this pattern makes 2 different airplane blocks using foundation piecing techniques. Let me show you those. This block is designed to be a diagonal block. This one is a block that can go straight across or straight up and down, depending on which way you position it in the quilt. By having 2 different blocks, we get some good movement going in the quilt, and those are the 2 blocks that we're going to work on today. So in the pattern, you're going to have full-sized copies for each block. And each one is going to have a number of different sections. For this one, the block that goes up and down has 4 different sections. The block that goes diagonally has only 2 sections. And the pattern includes all the full-size patterns, which you will then take to the copy store and get copies made for the number of blocks that you're going to make. We'll take those copies and we'll cut those apart. So we're going to cut apart all the pieces for each block, and we're going to make sure when we cut them that we leave a little bit of margin all the way around that. Also on each piece is a fabric cutting instruction that tells you the pieces of fabric that you're going to want to cut for each block. So follow that and cut those according to that. Rather than cutting pieces to the exact shape as shown on the pattern, we're going to cut larger rectangles, both because this is easier than cutting irregular shapes, but also because having pieces larger than we need gives us some wiggle room when we begin assembly of the blocks. Once we've got all the patterns and fabrics cut, we're ready to go. The basic premise of underpressed piecing is that we'll align the fabric with the right side out on the underside of the foundation pattern. That's the side that's just blank. Then we're going to stitch along the lines on the other side to join our fabric pieces. We'll trim and press as we go to complete each section, and then the sections will be joined to make the block. So for instance, on the diagonal block, we're going to create this section, and then we will join those two sections to make the finished block. We'll start by folding each paper foundation to aid in lining up pieces. So let's set that aside, and we're going to work with the two pieces that we've already cut out for this block. If you look at these, you're going to notice that each block has some labels on it. So we've got, this is block A of the quilt. It's labeled A1 and A2. So we've got a different piece for each section. And within that, each of the pieces is numbered. So here we've got piece A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, and A6. A refers to the block number or the block section, and then the number refers to the order that you're going to piece them in. We're going to want to fold this pattern on each of the lines, which are our stitching lines, so that we can align our paper pieces or our fabric pieces in place. And the way I like to do this is to take my thin ruler and line it up on top of my pattern. So I usually start in the middle with piece A1, and I just line my ruler up right on the line, and I fold my paper over against it. I don't need to fold all the way out to the edges. I just need to fold a little bit past the stitching line on each piece. So I'm going to go all the way around piece A1, folding each line. And then on piece A2, I'm going to, actually I don't need to fold all the way this one I'm going to fold all the way to the outside edge along this line, which I didn't do, so I should have done that when I started. Then we're going to fold along this line all the way to the edge, and this line all the way to the edge. We don't have to fold on our outside lines because those are going to be trimmed away. But I folded on each of the stitching lines all the way around that piece. Then what I want to do is fold for the very first piece a 1/4 inch seam allowance around it, just because that's going to make it much easier to line my pieces up. So on this case, I'm going to take the 1/4 inch mark on my ruler, align it right on top of my stitching line, and fold my pattern over along that line. I only have to take that one around my piece number 1, so it doesn't have to go all the way to the edges. And I'm going to do this for each and every part of each and every block. So we've got piece A done. Now we're going to do block A2. These are all labeled B, B1 through B5. There's 5 parts to this block. So again, we're going to go right along our stitching lines, folding our pattern along each stitching line. And then after we've got our stitching lines folded, we'll fold some little seam allowance lines on our first piece. So there's our stitching lines marked. And now we're going to fold our seam allowance on the first piece. Again, I'm just lining my 1/4 inch line up right along the pattern. All right, so all of my paper pieces are folded for my first block A. I've already folded the ones for block B, and that's the one we're actually going to stitch, but I want to show you what I do with my fabric pieces. In the block, you've got directions that tell you exactly what to cut for each of the pieces, and they are also labeled with the same numbers as are on your block. So this, for instance, is what makes the tail portion of the plane, which is this portion right here. So this block has 4 sections. One that makes the prop, one that makes the nose cone and the wing, one that makes the fuselage of the plane, and then one that makes the tail. So the tail is section D, And there's pieces from D1 through D5. So I've got some pieces for my sky, some pieces for my tail, and more pieces for the sky. So I take all of those pieces for D and I just wonder clip them with that so that I've got everything ready to go when we assemble that. I do the same thing for the prop, the wing, and the fuselage, and we're ready to start stitching. So I'll meet you at the sewing machine and we'll get going with that.